The nature of the case hit too close to home, and she found herself grappling with memories she had fought so hard to forget. The case was high profile, attracting media attention and public scrutiny. Chukwuma was a young man from a modest background, accused of raping the daughter of a prominent politician. The public had already condemned him, with headlines labeling him as a monster, a predator who had destroyed the young woman's life. Adobe's childhood in Umudike was like a soft melody played gently by the hands of time. The village was a place where the air was fresh and the mornings greeted everyone with a chirping of birds. Umudike was not large, but it was a close-knit community where everyone knew each other and every face was familiar. It was the kind of place where news traveled fast and people cared deeply for one another. Adobe was the shining star of her family. Her father, Chief Okeke, was one of the most respected men in the village. He was wise and kind, a man whose words carried weight in the community. He was the one people turned to for advice, the one who settled disputes and ensured peace in the village. Adobe looked up to him in every way. To her, he was the embodiment of all that was good in the world. Her mother, Nneka, was a gentle woman with a heart full of love. She cared for Adobe and her siblings with unwavering devotion. Adobe had two younger brothers, Chidi and Obinna, who adored her. They often followed her around, eager to hear her stories or seek her help with their homework. To them, Adobe was not just a sister, she was a second mother, a role model, and their protector. From a very young age, Adobe stood out. She was not only beautiful, with her smooth dark skin and bright intelligent eyes, but she was also incredibly smart. At school, she was always at the top of her class, and her teachers often spoke of her with admiration. Adobe is a gift, they would say, nodding with approval as she answered yet another difficult question with ease. But Adobe's beauty and intelligence were not what made her special in the eyes of her family and the village. It was her heart. She was kind to everyone, always ready to help, whether it was an elderly neighbor who needed water fetched or a classmate struggling with a lesson. She treated everyone with respect, just as her father had taught her. People are good, Chief Okeke often said to her. Treat them with kindness and they will return it. Adobe believed him. She had grown up watching her father interact with others, always with fairness and understanding. She saw how he treated her mother with love and care, how he was patient with her brothers, and how he always had the time for her, no matter how busy he was. In her eyes, her father was the perfect example of what a man should be, and so she believed that all men were like him, good, kind, and protective. As Adobe grew older, her dreams began to take shape. She had always wanted to be a lawyer, to fight for justice and help those who couldn't help themselves. Her father was proud of her ambition. He encouraged her to pursue her dreams and promised to support her in any way he could. You will make a great lawyer, Adobe, he would say, his voice filled with pride. You have the heart and the mind for it. When Adobe finished her secondary school with excellent results, it was no surprise to anyone in Umudike village. The entire village celebrated her success, knowing that she was destined for greater things. Her parents were overjoyed, and preparations for her admission into the university began immediately. They were ready to do whatever it took to ensure that their daughter could follow her dreams. And in the months leading up to her departure for university, Adobe could hardly contain her excitement. She spent her days helping her mother around the house, teaching her brothers, and daydreaming about the life that awaited her. She would imagine herself in the courtroom, standing tall and confident, fighting for justice. She could see her father in the audience, watching her with pride. But even as she dreamt of the future, Adobe was mindful of the values her parents had instilled in her. She promised herself that she would remain true to who she was, kind, respectful, and trusting. She wanted to make her father proud, not just with her achievements, but with the way she lived her life. It was during this period that Adobe met Uchina. He was from a neighboring village, a young man known for his charm and intelligence. Uchina was handsome, with a smile that could light up a room, and a way of speaking that made people listen. He was the kind of man who knew exactly what to say to make someone feel special. And when he set his eyes on Adobe, he knew he wanted her. Their paths crossed one afternoon at a village event. Adobe had gone with her family, and as they mingled with the other guests, Uchenna approached her. "Good afternoon," he greeted her with a smile. "I don't believe we've met before. I am Uchenna." Adobe looked up, slightly startled by the sudden introduction. She smiled. "Good afternoon, I'm Adobe." They talked for a while, exchanging pleasantries and discussing the event. Uchenna was smooth in his conversation, making her laugh with his witty remarks. He complimented her on her achievements and expressed admiration for her plans to study law. "It's rare to find a woman with such ambition," he said. "I'm very impressed." Adobe blushed slightly at his words, flattered by his attention. She had never been one to seek out male attention, but Uchenna's interest in her was undeniable. Over the next few weeks, they saw each other more frequently, as Uchenna made a point of visiting Umudike whenever he could. He would stop by her house, bringing small gifts for her and her family, always with a warm smile and kind words. It wasn't long before Uchenna asked her to join him on an outing in his village. "There is a party," he said. "It will be a great chance for you to relax before you start university. I promise you will have a good time." Adobe hesitated at first. She had never been to a party outside her village before, and the idea of leaving the familiar safety of her village was daunting. But Uchenna was persuasive. "Don't worry," he reassured her. "I will take care of everything. You'll be safe with me." With her parents' permission and trusting in Uchenna's words, Adobe agreed to go. The days leading up to the party were filled with anticipation. Adobe was excited about the prospect of experiencing something new and different. She had never been outside of her village for anything other than errands with her parents, and the thought of attending a party there thrilled her. Uchenna had assured her that it would be a night to remember, full of fun and laughter. She trusted him, believing that he would keep her safe, just as he had promised. On the day of the party, Adobe carefully selected her outfit. She wanted to look her best, but still maintain the modesty that her parents had taught her. After much deliberation, she chose a simple but elegant dress that accentuated her figure without being too revealing. Her mother, Nneka, smiled as she watched her daughter prepare. "You look beautiful, Adobe," Nneka said, her voice full of pride. "Remember to be careful while you have fun." "I will, Mama," Adobe replied, giving her mother a quick hug before heading out. Uchenna arrived right on time. His car was gleaming in the evening sun. He was dressed sharply, his cologne filling the air as he stepped out to greet her. "You look stunning, Adobe," he said, his eyes shining with admiration. Adobe blushed, a shy smile crossing her lips. "Thank you, Uchenna," she replied softly. The drive to the city was filled with light conversations and laughter. Uchenna played music that Adobe liked, occasionally glancing at her to see her reaction. The city lights began to twinkle in the distance as they approached, and Adobe felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness building up inside of her. The party was held in an upscale part of the city, at a lavish house with a grand entrance. Cars lined the driveway, and the sound of music and laughter spilled out into the night air. Adobe was in awe as they entered. Everything about the place was different from what she was used to. The people, the fashion, the way they spoke, it was so glamorous, so sophisticated. She felt like she had stepped into a different world. Uchenna introduced her to his friends, who were all polite and friendly, complimenting her on her beauty and poise. Adobe felt flattered and a little bit overwhelmed by the attention, but Uchenna stayed by her side, guiding her through the crowd, making sure she was comfortable. He offered her a drink, which she accepted hesitantly. She wasn't used to alcohol, but she didn't want to seem out of place, so she sipped slowly, trying to enjoy the taste. As the night wore on, the party grew livelier. The music became louder, the laughter more raucous, and the atmosphere more intense. Adobe noticed that Uchenna had been drinking more than usual, his behavior growing more relaxed and confident. He was no longer the attentive, caring man she had known. There was something different about him now, something uncertain. "Adobe, come with me," Uchenna said, taking her hand and leading her away from the crowd. "I want to show you something." Adobe followed him without question, trusting him completely. They walked through a dimly lit hallway, and out into the garden at the back of the house. The night air was cool, and the sound of the party faded into the background. Uchina led her to a secluded spot, away from prying eyes. He stopped and turned to face her, his expression very serious. Adobe, I've been wanting to tell you something, he began. You mean so much to me. I've never felt this way about any woman before. Adobe's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting this. She had liked Uchina, but she hadn't realized that his feelings for her were very deep. Uchina, I don't know what to say, she stammered, feeling a wave of emotions wash over her. Before she could gather her thoughts, Uchina stepped closer, his hands gripping her shoulders. His eyes bored into hers, and for the first time, Adobe felt a pang of fear. There was something in his gaze that she didn't recognize, something dark and very possessive. Uchina, what are you doing? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Just relax, he whispered. You will see, it's all going to be fine. Panic began to rise in Adobe's chest as Uchina's grip tightened. She tried to pull away, but he held her firmly, his strength overpowering her. The playful, charming Uchina she knew was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize, someone who now terrified her. Uchina, stop! Please let me go! But her words fell on deaf ears. Uchina's eyes were wild with desires, his attention driven by something dark and uncontrollable. Adobe struggled against him, but he was too strong. Her fear turned to terror as she realized what was about to happen. No, Uchina, please, she cried out, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. But it was already too late. The nightmare unfolded in a blur of pain and horror. The sounds of the party continuing in the distance, oblivious to the violence happening in the darkness. Uchina raped Adobe. When it was over, Adobe lay on the cold ground, broken and defeated. Uchina stood over her, his expression blank, as if nothing had happened. Without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the darkness. Adobe's world had shattered in the moment. The trust, the hope, and the innocence she once had was gone, replaced by a deep, unending pain. She managed to pull herself together, gathering what was left of her strength to get up and leave. She stumbled back into the house, avoiding the eyes of the partygoers, her body aching, her mind numb. She didn't know how she made it home that night, but when she finally reached the safety of her room, she collapsed on her bed and cried until there were no more tears left. The betrayal cut deep, and the shame was overwhelming. How could she tell anyone what had happened? How could she face her parents, her brothers, the village? The fear of judgment, the fear of being blamed, was too much to bear. So she made a decision. She would bury it all, every painful memory, every tear, every shred of trust she once had. She would lock it away and never speak of it again. Adobe would go on with her life. She would never be the same. The vibrant, hopeful young woman who once believed in the goodness of people was now gone, replaced by someone else, someone colder, harder, and determined never to let anyone hurt her again. Her journey to the university was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter in Adobe's life. She had always dreamt of this moment, the excitement of living on her own, meeting new people, and pursuing her ambitions. But when she finally arrived on campus, the dream she once had seemed distant and unimportant. The vibrant young woman who had eagerly looked forward to this phase of her life was gone, replaced by someone very cold. Adobe had become a master at hiding her true feelings. Every morning, she looked in the mirror and forced herself to smile, practicing the expression until it looked natural. She dressed neatly, always making sure to appear well put together, even if inside she felt like she was falling apart. On the surface, everything seemed fine. She attended her classes, participated in group discussions, and completed her assignments on time, but there was a coldness in her eyes, a detachment that no one could miss. Her classmates quickly noticed her aloofness. In group projects, Adobe was efficient and direct, but she never lingered for small talk after the work was done. She avoided social gatherings, preferring the solitude of her room to the noise of parties or get togethers. The other students tried to befriend her at first, drawn by her intelligence and poise, but they soon gave up when they realized that she wasn't interested in forming any connections. The nickname Ice Queen started as a joke whispered in the hallways, but it soon became the way everyone referred to her. Adobe didn't care. The mask she wore was her protection, a way to keep the world at a distance. Every time a male classmate tried to engage in conversation, she felt her guard go up. Her heart hardened. She couldn't trust them, couldn't let herself believe that they were any different from Uchina. To Adobe, all men were potential threats, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true nature. So she kept them at arm's length. Her responses curt and impersonal, her smile polite but very distant. Her professors noticed her academic excellence, but also her lack of engagement beyond the classroom. She was always prepared, always at the top of her class, but there was a lack of warmth, a missing spark that made her stand out in a very different way. Some tried to reach out, offering mentorship or opportunities to join student organizations, but Adobe declined them all. She had no interest in anything beyond her studies. She made sure everyone knew that. At home, her parents were proud of her achievements, but they couldn't ignore the changes in their daughter. When she came home during holidays, the once lively and talkative Adobe was now quiet and reserved. She no longer spent time chatting with her mother in the kitchen or playing with her younger siblings. Instead, she would lock herself in her room, reading or studying, avoiding any deep conversations. Her father, who had always been her confidant, noticed the walls she had built around herself, but didn't know how to break through them. Adobe, is everything alright? Her father asked one evening, his voice full of concern. Yes, Papa, Adobe replied, forcing a smile. I'm just focused on my studies. University is quite challenging. He nodded, not entirely convinced, but decided not to press further. He could see that something was wrong, but he didn't know how to help her. Adobe's decision to remain silent about her trauma allowed her to maintain the appearance of normalcy, but it came at a significant cost. The walls she had built around her heart were sturdy, but they were also isolating. As she progressed through university, her academic achievements became her sole focus. She poured herself into her studies, determined to prove that she was more than the broken girl she had become. But the harder she worked, the more she distanced herself from people around her. Her family grew increasingly worried. They could see the changes in her, but every time they tried to reach out, she shut them down. She spoke less and less about her life at the university, offering only vague answers to their questions. Her mother, Nneka, noticed how her once warm and affectionate daughter had become so cold and distant, but she didn't know how to approach the subject. Is Adobe alright? Nneka asked her husband one evening, her voice tinged with worry. She's not the same girl she used to be. She's just focused on her studies, her husband replied, though he too noticed the changes. University is demanding, like she said, and I'm sure she'll be back to herself once she has pulled through. But deep down, they both knew that something was still wrong. The spark that had once defined Adobe was gone, replaced by a cold determination. One day in the university, a classmate named Nkechi, who had admired Adobe's intellect and poise from afar, mustered the courage to approach her. Adobe, would you like to study together sometime? I've noticed you're really good at our coursework, and I could use some help, Nkechi offered with a hopeful smile. Adobe looked up from her notes, her expression unreadable. Thank you, but I prefer to study alone, she replied, her tone polite but firm. Nkechi nodded, trying to hide the disappointment. Alright, if you change your mind, just let me know. Adobe gave a brief nod and returned to her work, dismissing the encounter as quickly as it had begun. She couldn't afford to let anyone in, not after what had happened. She couldn't risk being hurt again. Her silence, her refusal to confront her past, weighed heavily on her. Adobe's success came at the expense of her happiness, and the loneliness she felt grew with each passing day. Years had passed since Adobe's time at the university, and in those years, she had built a reputation as one of the most formidable lawyers in Lagos. The city's fast-paced, chaotic environment suited her perfectly. It was a place where she could lose herself in work, where her past could remain buried under the piles of legal documents and court cases. Her cold, calculated demeanor had earned her respect and fear in equal measure. Clients sought her out for her sharp mind and unyielding determination, while her colleagues admired her ability to remain detached and objective, no matter how sensitive the case. But on the day she was assigned the case of Chukuma, a man accused of rape, something in Adobe shifted. At first, She treated the case like any other one, methodically going through the details, analyzing the evidence, and preparing her defense strategy. Yet, as she delved deeper, she found herself unsettled in ways that she hadn't felt in years. The nature of the case hit too close to home, and she found herself grappling with memories she had fought so hard to forget. The case was high profile, attracting media attention and public scrutiny. Chukwuma was a young man from a modest background, accused of raping the daughter of a prominent politician. The public had already condemned him, with headlines labeling him as a monster, a predator who had destroyed the young woman's life. Adobe had faced similar cases before, where the odds were stacked against her client, but this time was different. As she reviewed the case files in her office late at night, Adobe felt a gnawing unease. The evidence seemed too perfect, too neatly arranged. The victim's testimony was harrowing, detailed, and yet something about it didn't sit right with her. The forensic evidence, which should have been irrefutable, felt off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but the more she examined the case, the more she began to doubt the narrative that had been presented to her. She tried to shake off the feeling, reminding herself that her job was to defend her client to the best of her ability, regardless of her personal feelings. But the case lingered in her mind, intruding on her own thoughts, even when she wasn't working. Adobe had spent years burying her emotions, locking them away in a place where they couldn't hurt her anymore. But now, the walls that she had built around herself began to crack, and memories she had long suppressed started to resurface. Despite her discomfort, Adobe pressed on, determined to do her job. She interviewed witnesses, cross-examined the evidences, and prepared her argument. But as she did, she found herself questioning everything: her instincts, her judgment, and the very foundation of the case. For the first time in years, Adobe felt vulnerable, uncertain, and it terrified her. As the trial commenced, Adobe's unease only grew. She sat in the courtroom listening intently as the prosecution laid out their case against Chukwuma. The victim's testimony was heart-wrenching, painting Chukwuma as a cold and calculating predator. But as Adobe listened, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still very off. The inconsistencies in the evidence that had nagged her at the preparation became glaring apparent as the trial progressed. The timeline didn't quite add up. The forensic evidence, which should have been conclusive, was muddled and unclear. The more she scrutinized the details, the more she began to see holes in the prosecution's case. But what troubled her the most was the victim's testimony. There was something about it that didn't ring true, a subtle hesitation, a lack of detail that should have been there. Adobe had always prided herself on her ability to remain very objective, to separate her emotions from her work. But this very case was different. Every time she looked at Chukuma, sitting silently beside her, his eyes filled with a quiet desperation, she was reminded of her own past. Despite her initial resolve to treat Chukuma as just another client, Adobe found herself drawn to his case in a way she hadn't anticipated. She spent countless hours reviewing the evidence, re-interviewing witnesses, and digging into the background of everyone involved. She couldn't bring herself to defend a rapist, but the more she investigated, the more convinced she became. Chukwuma was not the monster he had been made out to be. But if he wasn't guilty, then who was responsible, and why had he been framed? The questions haunted her, keeping her awake at night, her mind racing with possibilities. Adobe knew she was getting close to the truth, but she also knew that uncovering it would come at a cost. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous the case became. The breakthrough in the case came when Adobe decided to investigate the key witness who had testified against Chukwuma. Something about the man's testimony had bothered her from the beginning. His confidence, the way he had answered every question with rehearsed precision, as if he had been preparing for this moment for a long time. She had initially dismissed it as a sign of a well-prepared witness, but now she wasn't so sure. Determined to find out more, Adobe dug into the witness's background. What she discovered left her reeling. The key witness against Chukwuma was none other than Uchina, the man who had assaulted her many years ago. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless and disoriented. Uchenna, the man who had shattered her trust and destroyed her innocence, was now standing in a courtroom accusing another man of the very same crime he had committed against her. Adobe's hand shook as she went over the details. Uchenna had risen through the ranks to become a successful businessman, using his wealth and influence to build a life of power and respectability. But underneath the polished exterior, he was still the same predator who had taken everything from her, and now he was using that same power to frame another innocent man. The memories Adobe had fought so hard to suppress came flooding back, overwhelming her with their intensity. She could see Uchenna's face as clearly as if it were yesterday, could feel the terror and helplessness she had experienced that night. But along with the fear came something else, a burning anger, a need for justice, not just for herself, but for Chukuma as well. Adobe knew she couldn't back down, not now, not when the truth was so close. She had to confront Uchenna, had to expose his lies and bring the real perpetrator to justice. But to do so, she would have to face the demons she had been running from for so long. She would have to look at Uchenna in the eyes and take back the power he had stolen from her. With renewed determination, Adobe prepared for the next phase of the trial. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Uchenna was a powerful man, and the forces arrayed against her were formidable. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose, a drive to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but Adobe was ready to face it, no longer willing to be a victim of her own past. Determined to find justice for Chukwuma, she immersed herself in the case like never before. Each day she spent in her office, the once cold and distant lawyer became a relentless force, combing through every detail, every witness statement, and every piece of evidence. The case was no longer just another trial. It had become a personal mission, a fight not only for Chukwuma, but for herself as well. She needed to prove that Uchenna was not the untouchable figure he had become, but the predator she knew him to be. Adobe worked late into the night, piecing together the events that had led to the trial. She mapped out the connections, identified the key players, and slowly began to unravel the webs of lies and deceit spun by Uchenna. The deeper she delved, the clearer it became that this was not just a simple case of mistaken identity or a setup. It was a meticulously planned attack on Chukwuma, designed to ensure that he would take the fall for a crime that he didn't commit. But as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall in place, Adobe found herself grappling with doubt. The more she learned about Chukwuma, the more she realized that he wasn't the simple innocent man she had initially believed him to be. He had secrets, hidden motives, and a past that was far more complex than she had been led to believe. The case was no longer black and white. It was filled with shades of grey that left her questioning Chukwuma's true intentions. Why had Chukwuma been targeted by Uchenna? Why had Uchenna gone to such lengths to frame him? These questions plagued Adobe as she continued to dig deeper. She knew that time was running out. The trial was moving quickly, and soon she would have to present her findings in court. But as she pieced together the truth, Adobe realized that this case was far more intricate and dangerous than she had ever imagined. As the trial progressed, Adobe's relentless investigation led her to a discovery that shook her to the core. Chukwuma, the man she had been fighting so hard to defend, had not been entirely honest with her. He had known about her past with Uchenna long before the case began, and his reasons for hiring her were far from innocent. Adobe sat in her office, the revelation sinking in like a heavy weight in her chest. Chukwuma had approached her not just because of her reputation as a lawyer, but because he had seen an opportunity to use her to his advantage. His younger sister had also fallen victim to Uchenna years ago, but when they had gone to court, Uchenna had won the case, leaving his sister broken and without justice. Chukwuma's plan had been to get justice for his sister by any means necessary. He knew that Adobe had been one of Uchina's victims, and he believed that by hiring her, he could manipulate the situation to finally bring Uchina down. He had hoped that Adobe's personal vendetta against Uchina would fuel her drive to win the case, and in doing so, secure the justice that had eluded his sister. The realization that she had been manipulated stung Adobe deeply. She had prided herself on her ability to see through lies and deception, yet Chukwuma had managed to keep her in the dark. The betrayal cut deep, and for a moment she questioned whether she could continue defending him. How could she fight for someone who had used her own painful past as a weapon? Unable to suppress her emotions any longer, Adobe decided to confront Chukwuma. She called him to her office, her mind racing as she tried to prepare herself for the conversation that was about to unfold. Chukwuma arrived, his demeanor calm and composed as usual. He had no idea what was coming. As he sat down across from her, Adobe's gaze bore into him, her expression unreadable. "Adobe, is everything alright?" Chukwuma asked, sensing the tension in the room. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Finally, she spoke, her voice laced with controlled anger. "How long have you known?" she asked, her tone icy. Chukwuma frowned, clearly confused. "Known what?" "About Uchina and me," Adobe clarified, her eyes narrowing. "How long have you known about my past with him?" Chukwuma's expression faltered, the calm facade he had been wearing slipping away. He opened his mouth to respond, but Adobe cut him off. "You knew, didn't you?" she continued, her voice rising. "You knew what he did to me, and you used it against me. You hired me because you thought I would be so blinded by my own pain that I would do whatever it took to bring him down. Isn't that right?" Chukwuma's silence was all the confirmation she needed. He looked away, guilt and shame evident on his face. "Yes," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I knew." Adobe felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over her. "But how could you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "How could you use my trauma like that? You lied to me, manipulated me, and made me a pawn in your own game. I trusted you, Chukwuma. I trusted you as my client." "I didn't mean to hurt you," Chukwuma said, his voice filled with so much regret. "I was just desperate. My sister, she never got justice. Uchina destroyed her and he walked away without facing any consequences. I thought that if anyone could bring him down, it would be you. And so you decided to use me." Adobe's eyes flashed with anger. "You didn't think for 1 second how it would affect me, how it would reopen old wounds that I have spent years trying to heal." Chukwuma sighed heavily, running a hand through his head. "Adobe, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted justice." "Justice?" Adobe scoffed, shaking her head. "You don't care about justice, you care about revenge, and you're willing to sacrifice anyone to get it, even me." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. Chukwuma looked at Adobe, his expression one of genuine remorse. "I am sorry," he repeated, his voice sincere. "If I could take it back, I would, but we are in too deep now. Uchina needs to be stopped, and you're the only one who can do it." Adobe stared at him, her mind racing. She knew he was right. Uchina did need to be stopped, but the fact that Chukwuma had used her pain for his own gain left a bitter taste in her mouth. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him for that. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore," Adobe said quietly, her voice filled with hurt. Chukwuma looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Please, Adobe, don't give up on this case. Don't let Uchina win again. Not after everything he has done." Adobe remained silent, her heart torn between her desire for justice and her anger at Chukwuma's betrayal. She knew that the choice she had made now would define the rest of the trial, and possibly her life. "I need time to think," she finally said, her voice cold and distant. Chukwuma nodded, understanding that there was nothing more he could say. He stood up, casting one last glance at Adobe before turning to leave. As the door closed behind him, Adobe leaned back in her chair, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She knew that whatever decision she made, there would be no turning back. The stakes had never been higher, and the battle she had faced was not just in the courtroom, but within herself as well. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the trial reached its climax. The evidence against Chukwuma was crumbling, and Uchenna's carefully constructed lies were beginning to unravel. Adobe had presented a compelling case, highlighting the inconsistencies in the prosecution's argument and exposing the flaws in Uchenna's testimonies. It seemed that justice was finally within reach, but as the trial neared its conclusion, Uchenna made his move. He approached Adobe outside of the courtroom one evening, his face a mask of cold fury. The conversations that followed left Adobe shaking to her core. "You think you've won, Adobe," Uchenna sneered, his voice low and menacing. "But you have no idea what you're up against." Adobe remained silent, her heart pounding in her chest as Uchenna continued. "If you don't ensure Chukwuma is convicted, I will make sure the world knows about your past. I will tell them how you threw yourself at me, begged for my attention, and how you were nothing but a desperate little girl seeking affection." His words cut deep, the cruel lies bringing back the pain and humiliation Adobe had worked so hard to bury. Uchenna's threat was clear. If she didn't betray her client, he would destroy her reputation and bring shame upon her family. He even hinted that if her family didn't believe his story, he would demand a test to prove her lack of purity, a move that would further tarnish her in the eyes of those she loved. Adobe felt the walls closing in around her. She was faced with an impossible choice: betray Chukwuma, an innocent man, and let Uchenna walk free, or protect herself and her family by ensuring Chukwuma was convicted. The weight of the decision threatened to crush her, leaving her paralyzed with fear and uncertainty. As she stood there, staring into the eyes of the man who had once destroyed her life, Adobe knew that whatever choice she made, there would be no turning back. The stakes had never been higher, and the battle she faced was not just in the courtroom, but it was also within herself. With her heart racing and her mind in turmoil, Adobe turned and walked away, knowing that the hardest part of her journey was still to come. Her world felt like it was falling apart, but she refused to let it break her. The revelations about Chukwuma's deceit had shaken her deeply, yet she knew she couldn't back down. The truth needed to come out, and she was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. Every day felt like a battle as Adobe prepared for the final stages of the trial. The pressure was immense, and the stakes were higher than ever. Uchenna was powerful, influential, and he wasn't afraid to use that power to silence anyone who got in his way. Adobe had seen it happen before, and she knew that exposing his lies would not be easy. As the days for the trial neared its conclusion, Adobe worked tirelessly, poring over every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every legal argument. She knew that she had to be prepared for anything Uchenna might throw at her, and she was determined not to let him intimidate her. The turning point came when Adobe managed to obtain a crucial piece of evidence. It was an email exchange between Uchenna and a key witness that proved he had coerced them into lying on the stand. It was the smoking gun she had been looking for, and with it, she knew she had the power to bring Uchenna down. The final day of the trial arrived with a palpable tension in the air. The courtroom was packed with journalists and spectators alike, eager to witness the dramatic conclusion. Adobe felt a knot in her stomach as she entered the courtroom, but she kept her head held high, knowing she had done everything in her power to seek justice. As the proceedings began, Adobe stood to present the damning evidence against Uchenna. The courtroom fell silent as she held up a printed copy of the email exchange, the very evidence that would expose Uchenna's deceit. "Your Honor," Adobe began, her voice steady despite the tension, "I would like to submit this as evidence. It is an email exchange between the defendant Uchenna and a key witness in this case." The judge nodded, signaling for her to proceed. Adobe took a deep breath and began to read the emails aloud, her voice clear and measured. Email from Uchenna to witness. "Make sure your statement aligns with what we have discussed. If you do as I've instructed, there will be no issues. Remember, this is bigger than just you or me. It is about ensuring we protect what is ours." The courtroom was utterly silent, the weight of Uchenna's manipulation hanging heavy in the air. Adobe continued, her eyes never leaving the judge as she read the next email. Reply from witness to Uchenna. "I understand, Uchenna. I will do exactly as you said. But what if she finds out? She's smart and I'm worried. The tension in the room was palpable as Adobe paused, allowing the words to sink in. Then she read the final email from Uchina. Uchina's response: she won't find out if you stick to the plan. Remember, you have more to lose than I do if this goes wrong. Follow my lead and we will both come out on top. As she finished reading, Adobe looked up to see the shock and disbelief on the faces of the judge and everyone present. Uchenna's confident demeanor had vanished, replaced by a look of panic as he realized the magnitude of what had just been revealed. The defense lawyer tried to object, but the damage had already been done. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Adobe had exposed Uchenna's lies for all to see, and the jury now had the evidence they needed to make their decision. When the jury returned with their verdict, the tension was almost unbearable. Adobe held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "Not guilty," the foreman announced, and Adobe felt a wave of relief wash over her. Chukma had been acquitted, and Uchenna's lies had been laid bare for all to see. But as the courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and applause, Adobe couldn't shake the bittersweet feeling that lingered. She had won the case, but the victory came at a personal cost. The betrayal she had uncovered, not just from Uchenna but also from Chukuma, had left scars that would take time to heal. Chukuma approached her after the trial. His expression, one of remorse. "Adobe," he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "There is nothing more to say, Chukuma," she said softly. "You got what you wanted. Justice for your sister, right? But what you did to me, I don't know if I can ever forgive that." "I'm sorry," Chukuma said, his voice filled with so much regret. "I never meant to hurt you. I just didn't know any other way." Adobe looked at him, her emotions conflicted. She had fought so hard to clear his name, but the pain of this deception still lingered. "Maybe one day we can move past this," she said quietly. "But right now, I just need time." As Chukma walked away, Adobe realized that despite everything, she had gained something important from this experience. She had faced her past head on, confronted her fears, and stood up for what she believed in. And in doing so, she had found strength within herself that she never knew she had. With the trial behind her, Adobe knew that the journey to healing was just beginning. The scars left by Uchina and Chukma's betrayal were deep, but she was determined not to let them define her. She had been through so much, but she refused to be a victim any longer. Adobe took a step that she had long avoided. She sought therapy. For years, she had bottled up her pain, burying it deep within herself. But now, she realized that she needed help to truly heal. The sessions were difficult, forcing her to confront the trauma she had had to forget, but they also brought her a sense of relief she hadn't felt in years. Through therapy, Adobe began to understand that her pain was not her fault, that she didn't have to carry the burden alone. She learned to forgive herself for the silence she had kept for so long, and slowly she started to let go of the anger and bitterness that had consumed her. It wasn't an easy process, but there were days when the memories still haunted her. But Adobe was determined to keep moving forward. She began to reconnect with her family and friends, opening up to them in ways she had never had before. The walls she had built around her heart began to crumble, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable. As time passed, Adobe slowly began to rebuild her trust in others, particularly in men. It was a slow process, filled with doubt and fears, but she knew that she couldn't let the actions of a few dictate the rest of her life. She started to see that not all men were like Uchenna, and there were those who were kind, respectful, and deserving of her trust. Her journey to healing was far from over, but she was finally on the right path. She had faced her demons, stood up for herself, and found the strength to move on. Her life had slowly begun to return to normalcy. The shadows of her past still lingered, but they no longer had the power to control her. She had begun to rebuild all of her relationships, especially that with her family. One afternoon, as she was leaving her office, she noticed a familiar figure waiting by the entrance. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized Uchenna. He was leaning against his car, his eyes fixed on her with the same arrogance she had seen years ago. But this time, she wasn't scared. She was no longer the scared broken girl he had once known. She was stronger now, and she refused to let him intimidate her. "Why are you here, Uchina?" Adobe asked, her voice calm but firm. Uchina smirked, stepping closer. "You think you've won, don't you? You think exposing me in that courtroom has changed anything?" Adobe held her ground, meeting his gaze. "It's over, Uchenna. You have no power over me. Your lies, your threats, they mean nothing." Uchenna's smirk faltered, replaced by a sneer of anger. "You've made a mistake, Adobe. You think you're untouchable now, but you're still that naive girl who trusted too easily." "Not anymore," Adobe said, her voice steady. "I am not afraid of you, Uchenna. You cannot hurt me or my family anymore." With that, Adobe did something she had never done before. She turned her back on him, walking away without looking back. Uchenna's voice followed her, laced with frustration and anger, but she didn't let it affect her. She had taken back control, and there was no turning back. That evening, Adobe gathered her family together in their living room. Her parents, once vibrant and full of life, now wore the weight of worry on their faces. Her younger siblings sat quietly, sensing the seriousness of the moment. Adobe took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to reveal would change everything. "I have something to tell you all," Adobe began, her voice trembling slightly. "It's something I should have told you years ago, but I was too ashamed, too afraid, but I can't keep it hidden any longer." Her mother's eyes widened with concern, and her father leaned forward, his expression serious. Adobe recounted the night of the assault, how Uchenna had betrayed her trust, and how she had kept the secret buried deep inside her for so long. The room was silent as she spoke, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. When she finished, there were tears in her mother's eyes, and her father's face was etched with a mixture of sorrow and anger. But instead of the rejection Adobe had feared, she found only love and support. "We are so sorry, Adobe," her father said, his voice choked with emotion. "We should have protected you. We should have known." Adobe shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It wasn't your fault, Papa. I just couldn't bear the thought of bringing shame to our family. But I realized that keeping it a secret only gave Uchenna more power." Her mother reached out, taking her hand. "You are so brave, Adobe. We love you and we are here for you always." In that moment, Adobe felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The truth was out, and it came with a sense of freedom she had never known. Uchenna's power over her was broken, and she could finally begin to heal, surrounded by the love and support of her family. 3 months later, while Adobe was seated in her office, she received the notification for a new case. She was going to be the defense counsel of a rape case against Uchenna. Adobe smiled, knowing that finally the chance to put Uchenna behind bars was now in her hands. The moral lesson of the story is that confronting your past and seeking justice are essential for healing. Adobe's journey shows that hiding pain only prolongs it, while facing it head on leads to personal growth and peace. She finds the courage to heal, rebuild her life, and learn to trust again, even after betrayal. Thank you so much for watching this fantastic story on African Stories by Tiana. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing stories. See you next time.